I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You're the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. I don't think I've ever explained that open there, but I chose those clips. Obviously, got my dad in there, showing honor where honor is due. And then two influences, Billy Graham and Oral Roberts. I'm an Oral Roberts grad. And the Billy Graham, I just, I was going through all these different quotes, and I love that one. What this world needs is a Christian revolution. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I want to kind of be a part of, right? And that's why we do these interviews and things like that. Well, today we're going to talk about that Christian revolution and what you can do to be a part of it, not just, for a short period of time or whatever, like the world's revolutions, sometimes years, every single day. And that's the title of a new book out called Everyday Revolutionary. And it is written by J.D. Greear, and he's always a favorite here at Life Today, and I'm glad he came back to talk about this one. So we're going to talk about you and your part in it. J.D., welcome back to Life Today
Randy,
Live. Good to see you.
Always one of my favorite times to get to spend some time with you, so thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into it, man. What does it mean? What? Let's start with the revolutionary part, because that's got a lot of connotations, and not all revolutions are good. We know that. In fact, you got red on the cover, which has some political connections that may or may not be good. Where are you going with this?
Yeah. I find that a lot of Christians in the church I pastor, they actually very much want to be faithful to Jesus. They want to be bold where they need to be bold. They also feel like they're kind of sucked into a culture war that they didn't really ask to be a part of, and they kind of more often than not feel like pawns in it. Wondering, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? Is it, posted on my social media feed and putting signs up in my yard that, battle my neighbor's signs? And what I try to explain in this book is that Jesus does call people to a revolution, but it's different than what we think. It's a revolution that is focused on displaying the gospel and showing that we're part of a different kingdom. One of the, it was a few years ago as I was working through the book of Daniel. Daniel is a book, it's very unique in the Old Testament because it's the only book in the Old Testament that's not fully written in Hebrew. The intro and the conclusion are in Hebrew, but the middle section is all in Aramaic, which was the language of Babylon, and that's because it was written in Babylon. Huh. And it's the structure of the book itself is kind of asking you a question. It's like, hey, you know how to be faithful to God in Hebrew, but do you know how to do it in Aramaic? What does that look like? And Daniel, the whole story of Daniel is him learning to live in Babylon's palace. Learning to be a servant of King Nebuchadnezzar, if you will, And what we find is that he is so courageous in that palace that he gets thrown in the lion's den. His friends get put into the fiery furnace. So he has no problem with the boldness and the countercultural part, but he's also so beloved by the pagan kings who threw him there that they stand outside of his the lion's den all night long, weeping and hoping that he makes it through the night. And the question that prompted the book is, how do we become like that in our culture? How do we become the kind of people who, we make the culture around us so mad that they want to throw us in the lion's den, yet we're so beloved by them because of all the kindness and because of the ways that we love them as our neighbors, that they say, like, I don't think we can get rid of you, because if we get rid of you, we'll have to raise our taxes. That's how much you're taking care of us. And that's what the book is an exploration of, how to go from just the culture war. Because I'm not talking about downplaying truth or, just going along with everything. How do you go from being just a part of the culture war to actual gospel witness and gospel transformation? Because being a bold culture warrior and being a gospel witness are not the same thing. And you can succeed at one, even as you fail at the other one.
Yeah, okay, so the Summit Church there in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, I believe, is one of those, what do they call it, a purple state or something?
Yeah, purple state. Yeah, you never know which way we're going to go.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, and in that scenario, what we can kind of do, and I believe Christianity should impact every area of culture, including politics. Okay, so that's my starting point. But at the same time, we can fall into the political and sometimes, conflate that with the spiritual. How do you navigate that? Because that's a tough one.
Yeah, and absolutely. In fact, that's the kind of the dilemma I start the book with, is I present some real situations where I'm like, what's the right thing for me to do here? Because I always want to, like you said, Randy, there's a famous line by a theologian named Abraham Kuyper who said, there's not one square inch of the entire cosmos over which Jesus does not declare emphatically mine.
Yep.
And so it means that I want to bring my Christian worldview into how I think about not just abortion or religious liberty. I also want to apply it to things like healthcare, and is universalized healthcare, is that really a good idea? How about a socialized economy? And how about the marginal tax rate? I want my Christian worldview to affect everything. But at the same time, I also realize that you see the apostles and Jesus. I mean, Rome had all kinds of political problems. The Apostle Paul didn't write any epistles addressing, like, here's the political reform I want to see happen in Rome. What he did is he wrote about the gospel, about making disciples. I guess you could say the irony is that the result of that preaching were all these political reforms happened.
Exactly.
The tip of the spear was him presenting Jesus. One of the chapters in the book says that the gospel transforms our politics, but then it trumps them. Yeah. And what I mean by that is transforms our politics as you begin to apply the gospel to your political worldview. It is essentially, I think we could say without exaggeration, the gospel has led to every significant political reform of really any substance in history. Yeah. Whether we're talking about, the equality of all peoples, to the freedom of religion, to the dignity of man, to, women's rights, all of it is going to have grounding in the gospel. But when you see Jesus and Paul, they're often saying, you know what, I'm actually not going to weigh in to that secondary question because I want to keep my focus on the primary question. Let me just use one example, and I hope I'm not giving you too long of an answer here.
That's great.
But there's a situation in Luke 12 where a brother comes to Jesus. It's the younger brother, and he's complaining because his older brother has cheated him out of the inheritance. And in those days, your biblical history, older brothers had a lot of sway, and they really could. They could take all the inheritance and leave their younger brother in the cold. He is complaining about a legitimate social justice problem. Mm-hmm. Now, Jesus cared about justice. He talked about it all the time. Mm-hmm. What's fascinating is how he responded. He said, man, who made me a judge over you? And then he proceeds in the rest of Luke 12 to preach a sermon on the idolatry of greed that would have applied to both the younger brother and the older brother. Mm. Now, what do we take away from that? Do we take away from that Jesus didn't care about justice? Of course not. Do we take away from that he was like, this is an irrelevant question? No, he appointed judges to think through that. Do we take away from that he felt like he was incompetent to? No, of course he would have been the greatest judge of all. Right. But he just knew that at that moment, the more essential thing was proclaiming the gospel. And so what he did is he mediated. He's like, it's not that I don't have a perspective. I'm just not going to weigh in on that secondary or tertiary thing and put the weight of my ministry behind it, because I'm going to focus on this thing over here. I often tell our people, Randy, at our church, like, you know what? I've got a perspective on global warming, and I think my perspective is right. If I didn't think it was right, I wouldn't hold it.
Right.
But I'm not going to, I might be wrong. I might be wrong in my perspective on global warming, but I am not wrong about the gospel. Yeah. And I will not let my opinions on the former keep people from hearing me on the latter.
Yeah. And that's okay. So we do this as the unwanted pregnancy, unplanned child, me, right? I actually have very strong feelings about abortion and the value of life, and, getting to the question of when does life begin? I think we can discuss it, but it's a heck of a lot earlier than they want to, make abortions legal.
Right.
Wherever you land on that. But, anyway, it's easy for me to talk about the political ramifications of it. And I will vote I will not vote for a pro-abortion candidate.
Yeah.
Period. That's me.
Here.
But I also realize, just as you're saying, that you can make all the laws in the world, but if you don't change the thoughts, the heart of the men, yes, men and women, that make abortions, possible, you you're kind of fighting a current. So I'm like you, man. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know what I'm going to do, and if you ask me specifically about the political ramifications, I'll tell you.
Same.
But my number one priority is to preach the gospel, because you must be born again. And
Right.
when you are born again, you have the Holy Spirit who will lead you into all truth. And I'm 100% convinced that truth is pro-life.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
So, I mean, I think we shortchange ourselves sometimes. You know, there's the left has talked about how the church is sold out to Donald Trump, and there's even some in the church that don't like that either. And I hate tying myself to a political personality, because they'll always let you down. But if we tie ourselves to the truth, that's where the power is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I want to be clear. I do not mean by anything I said ever backing down from clarity on what the Bible says, no matter how unpopular it is. Homosexuality, abortion. I mean, we have to speak the whole counsel of God.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is recognizing that even beyond that, there is a priority of our witness that ultimately shapes everything that we do. When Jesus left in Acts 1, when he ascended, the last thing he said to his disciples is, "You will be my witnesses." I think about all the things he could have put into that blank. That would have been true. You'll be my worshipers. You'll be my social justice advocates.
Warriors.
Right. Yeah. But the one thing that he said, this is what you are actually going to do, is you're going to testify to me. The win in this is going to be a faithful representation of who I am. So there's quite often, in fact, I would even say usually, there is a more wise choice when it comes to voting in a presidential election.
Sure.
There's going to be one that lines up. No, nobody's perfect. All politics is having to hold your nose and vote sometimes, or choosing the lesser of two evils. So there, a lot of times there's, I would say there's usually a wiser choice, but I have to be very careful that I don't ever let the name of Jesus become synonymous in the community's eyes with a particular political candidate or a party.
Yeah. Because
the third commandment tells me not to take the Lord's name in vain, which means never to associate his holy name with something that is unholy. And as much as you might support whatever political candidate you're passionate about, you do not want Jesus to be given the responsibility of all that political leader's failings. Yeah. And so I'm like, yes, I believe there's a wiser choice. And pressed, I'll kind of tell you what I think the wiser choice is. But I need to make clear that the message of Jesus is different, and that my ultimate allegiance is to him, and it's not to these secondary things. We actually learned something, I think, Randy, from Jesus's his own disciples. In the list that Matthew gives of his disciples, he lists out their names, but for two of them, he includes a very interesting, just like little detail. He calls Matthew himself the tax collector, and then he calls Simon the zealot. What that tells you is that they were on the opposite sides of one of the most pressing political questions of the day.
Wow. Yeah.
What do you do with Rome? And Simon the zealot was like, Matthew, you big government, pink, commie loving, he just was, I'm sure he had all kinds of opinions, and Matthew, Matthew had all kinds of thoughts about Simon, but Jesus called them both to be his disciples. I'm sure they argued, late at night around the fire, but the point was the unity they had in the primary thing, Jesus, outweighed some of their difference on, what the best approach to the marginal tax rate and healthcare is. We can handle those kinds of disagreements in the church. What we need is unity around the lordship of Jesus.
That's a great point, because considering the culture and the times, Matthew would have been the leftist of the left, and Simon would have been the right wing nut.
Exactly right.
And yet there they both are. Okay, this is the book, Everyday Revolutionary. It's available now. You can pick it up wherever you get books, and it's a good read. I think it'll just kind of help give you some clarity. One of the things that JD says in there is to speak loudly, but testify quietly in your closet. Did I get that right?
Well, a few of the words are right. It's live quietly and testify loudly.
Okay. Well, that's not what most of us do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You said what most of us do. What I said is what we should do. Yeah. You me explain that?
Yeah, it'd probably be best.
So Paul, in writing to a generation of Christians about how they could fulfill the Great Commission, tells them in First Thessalonians that they should live quietly. Peter doesn't use the word quietly, but he basically explains the same concept in his epistle, First Peter. The word he actually uses is remarkably. Live remarkably in a way that is so remarkable that people feel driven to ask you a reason for the hope that is in you. And, it's kind of ironic that this is coming from two guys who both put their finger in Caesar's face and said, by wicked hands, you've killed Jesus. I mean, they were not like sheepish, mousy, quiet guys. But so the idea of living quietly doesn't mean that you're in any way backing down from your witness. What they're doing is they're laying out the normal life of the Christian that sets you up for loud testimony. So in the book, what I do is for using the epistles of Paul and Peter, I point out 5 kind of things that every Christian can do every day in their secular job. These 5 things are the essence of what it means to live quietly. To live quietly means that what you're doing is creation fulfilling, which means you're beautifying creation and making the world a better place to live in. That came out of the Garden of Eden. You are excellence pursuing. Paul says in Colossians 3 that whatever we're doing, whether it's picking up trash or turning in a math assignment or preaching a sermon, we're doing it as unto the Lord to put on display His glory. The third thing is we are holiness reflecting, which means everything we're doing has the highest integrity standards, because it reflects a God of justice and purity. It is redemption displaying, which means that we're looking for ways that we can not just give people what they deserve, but we can pour out the generosity of Christ. And then number 5, it's mission advancing, which means we're looking for ways that we can be able to testify to Jesus through it. When you live that way, living quietly, what Peter explains is that sets you up for these moments of loud testimony where you're able to explain the reason for the difference. One of the problems I believe that Christians face is they're like, well, I don't really know what to do. Like, do I go in and do I, pass out tracts in my workplace, or do I, and what Peter is saying is, well, maybe, but what you should do first is live in such a way that is so remarkable and beautiful that you feel beloved by Babylon because of how much blessing you bring to it. And then that sets you up for those moments of loud testimony, which occur through the generosity you have, the joy you have in the midst of pain. They're going to occur through the hospitality that you show, just all these different ways that you're going to be able to put on display Jesus and then explain who He is.
Yeah. And, that would actually gain you favor in ways that just you running your mouth won't. If you're the best worker there, you're serving the purpose of your job, your company, or whatever or if you're a mother and you got kids and you're helping at the school and the teachers, administration, they come to rely on you. I mean, that sets you up, which is what I hear you saying, so that when you need to testify, when you need to stand up, you actually have a better audience.
Yeah, and think for a minute, Randy, about King Darius standing outside of Daniel's, where the lion's den was. He's weeping. Why? He's not weeping. He says that, man, I want to hear another sermon by Daniel. I want to have Daniel tell me again how wrong all this stuff is. I mean, Daniel did that. That's how he got in the lion's den.
He did.
But the reason he was weeping is because Daniel had brought such blessing and peace into his life that he's like, I don't want to live without Daniel.
Yeah.
That's how we're supposed to be in our community, where they're like, I always say, I want people in our community, our very blue community, by the way. This community I live in here, North Carolina, it's kind of a purple state, but the part I live in, Durham, that's like as blue can get. I want those people to look at me and say, man, I don't believe what those crazy people over at Summit believe, but thank God they're here, because if not, we'd have to raise our taxes.
Yeah.
That's how I want to be in this community.
Yeah. At the same time, though, when we look at Daniel, and I know you hear this, and as someone who travels the world seeing literal persecution of Christians where they're being killed for their faith, I get tired of some of the whiny Christians who are like, I'm being persecuted because I posted this on X and now people are mad at me, Yeah. But Daniel obviously does point out a very real truth. And that is, we need to be prepared for the consequences of standing up when it's not popular.
That's right. Yeah. I'll just put exclamation point what you say, because I actually think you said it very well. But I'm like, let's save the word persecution for people who are, being in prison for their faith for 30 years or watching their family get killed. Like they can have the word persecution, but what we're experiencing here in America, it's certainly a kind of marginalization
Sure.
that can lead to persecution. Because when you're a business owner who's gotten shut down because you refuse to fly the pride flag, yeah,
Yeah.
that's suffering, and that is, it's wrong and it's unfair. And we're, unfortunately, we're in a country, which I love our country, but you can just see the winds, the way they're kind of blowing, that it looks like that will continue. That kind of marginalization. There's a sociologist that I talk about in the book who says that we now live in a negative world. We used to live in a positive world, and that meant that Christianity was seen as a social asset. If you were a Christian, you were trustworthy, and you whatever. Then it became like a neutral. Like, hey, Christianity is one option among many. Well, unfortunately, since Obergefell in 2014 and some of the stuff that happened in D.C., Christianity has been seen as a negative. Like it's actually not just an option; it's part of the problem. If that's the way the world goes, then we should expect, like Daniel, that our message becomes even more and more unpopular. Which is why it's all the more reason for us to be very courageous and expecting to suffer, but at the same time, so filled with love and compassion that people couldn't imagine. How they couldn't imagine how poor the community would be if we weren't a part of it.
Yeah, make your neighbors cry if they shut down your business, right? Which
Right.
They could rally around you. Yeah, no, I this is good because I think again it's anchored to the gospel, whichever way the culture goes, and I'm like you, man. I'm gonna. I don't know, say what I can, do what I can to make sure we don't go the way even of like Canada, because there's some crazy stuff going on up there.
Right.
But I'm not going to take my eye off the ball, which is preaching the gospel, whatever the case may be. That's the place to be.
Absolutely.
I think, can we do this? I mean, can the average person do this? Or is this only, pastor of a church like you and whatever you want to call me, host of a podcast like me?
Yeah, right. Well, I actually think it's the more important part of the mission is actually with those people instead of with us. I mean, I think you and I have a role. Yeah. We're here having this conversation. Hopefully it's blessing people and encouraging them. But when Paul says in Ephesians 4 that he gave people like us, pastors and teachers, he gave us for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry. Yep. What that means is, I always tell our church this, as a pastor, the day I became a pastor, I left the ministry because the ministry is what the saints do. And right now I'm actually behind the saints, building them up so that they can do it. When I was going through this book and kind of unpacking the different form, what I'm realizing is that I don't have a chance to apply most of these. Most of them are by people that are in the so-called secular workforce. It's the person teaching third grade, at their public elementary school. Yeah. It's the person homeschooling. It's the guy who's going and sitting in a board meeting. Yeah. These are the ones that are thinking, what does it mean to honor Jesus and glorify Jesus in Babylon? Because Babylon, the language is Aramaic. I'm speaking metaphorically here. It's Aramaic, not Hebrew. As a pastor, I preach every week in Hebrew to people who assume a Christian worldview and who believe the Bible is the authority. Our people go out into a world where those things are not assumed, and they have to know how to glorify God in Babylon. But the good news is the book of Daniel and almost the entire New Testament is written to explain to us how we can do that.
Yeah, we're the guys sitting in the tents, sending everybody else out to the front lines.
Well, I mean, I don't know about that, but yeah, I think
metaphorically. But and the thing is you look all through Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, the promise to the average person, the teacher at the school, the guy working in a secular company, the person working in Hollywood or in politics in D.C., is that God's promise is the same to all of us, and He's with us. And if we fight the battle His way, He's guaranteeing the win. And whether that means the culture goes with you or you just are in a winning position because you're obedient to God and you have His presence with you and peace that passes all understanding when things go sideways, that promise stands for all of us, and it's a beautiful thing.
Right. Yeah, amen.
All right, I want to show people your website. This is jdgreear.com, 2 E's in Greear. You can catch up with him. He's got a lot of great resources. He's got sermons that will encourage you and teach you, and just a solid guy. If you're looking for some just some solid Bible teaching and you relate to JD, jump over to that website. Anything else you want to add, man? I love it when you're here, and I appreciate your time today.
No, as always, you did a great job asking the questions to get the stuff out. So I will say this, but it'd be my last thing. Whenever you write a book or do something, you feel like it's true and you want the message to get out there. There are 2 or 3 books that I've written. Maybe this is the third one where you feel like I have to do this. This is not a message. This is a life burden. Well, the first one for me was Stop Asking Jesus Into Your Heart, because it was about the assurance of salvation, which I struggled with for a long time. The second one was called Gospel, and that was just the idea that the gospel is not just the beginning of Christianity. The gospel is what sustains us all the way through. And this one is the one I'm actually saying this is kind of what it means to be a faithful follower of Jesus in 21st century America. So I hope it's a blessing. It was a blessing to work through it, to teach our people through it, and I hope it's a blessing to your listeners.
Yeah, no doubt. And you got to think about this is we're living in a little bit of a lull, sort of politically, and with some of the craziness that we've seen in the past, but it's coming again.
Yeah. All right.
So prepare yourselves, people. That's what JD's book will do, man. Appreciate you again. Thanks for your time.
Man, love it. Thanks, Randy.
Appreciate you guys out there watching. Like I said, arm up. This is the time to get prepared, because it's going to be tough at times, but you can be that everyday revolutionary, and JD's laid it out for you. So very helpful. Appreciate you guys. Hit share if you haven't followed, like, subscribe, wherever you're watching. Do that. You'll get more on Life Today Live. And come back. We'll be here for you right here on Life Today Live.